Welcome to Blueprint for Life, the podcast designed to encourage, uplift, and challenge you on your journey. In just a moment, we will be joined by our host, Elder Lawrence McCarter Jr. We are thrilled you are willing to join us on this transformational ride. At Blueprint for Life, we believe each of us has a unique blueprint crafted by God Himself. This podcast will explore how to discover and unlock that blueprint, allowing you to live a life of purpose, fulfillment, and joy. Through insightful conversations, thought-provoking interviews, and biblical truths, we will delve into the keys that can unlock your potential. Together, we will navigate the challenges, setbacks, and triumphs that come our way, always relying on the timeless wisdom found in God's Word.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Blueprint for Life podcast. I am your host, Lawrence Carter. I am so glad to have each one of you with me today, wherever you are on this coast, that coast, this continent, that continent. Doesn't matter where you are. Just so happy to have you here with me. Today, we're kicking off episode 2, Spiritual versus Christian. Which is the better path? I have so often heard different people talking, especially some of the people that kind of run in some of the circles that I've communicated with, and different ones have always said more spiritual than I am religious. And there's this big movement seems to be to kind of distance ourselves from Christianity in general, and I'm not sure if people really realize what it is that they're actually doing, or if people think that it's just the thing to do in separating themselves from the church. And believe me, I get it. There have been so many scandals over the last several years as it pertains to the Christian church. You have different ones that have fallen from grace, whether it is the accusations made against T.D. Jakes, whether it's the whole issue with Creflo Dollar and his I Want a Bigger Plane situation. There have been so many different issues that have risen within the Christian church, even down to statements that men like John MacArthur have made about Martin Luther King, about him not having been Christian, and making statements that seem to point to him being a bit of a white supremacist. I can't speak to the heart of these individuals. I can't speak to what their innermost feelings are. I can't do much more than any of you can do, aside from respond to what a person says. All I can really go by is what you say. If what you say is a representative of what you feel, then I can only suppose that that's who you are. And I think that's just like the general way that we've learned to handle people. Like, okay, I don't know the innermost thoughts in your mind, so I can only go by what you say. Hey, if this is how you feel, if what you're saying is how you really truly feel, then I guess that's going to be how I have to deal with you. And that's really how we've had to learn how to deal with people. The problem with that whole situation is it has really reflected badly on the Christian church. And as a result, it has caused a lot of people to take a huge step back away from the church and to feel as if it was necessary to distance themselves so that they don't have this negative association with the church. That's the direction that I came from when I was sitting down looking at, okay, what do we want to talk about this time? Where do I want to come from this time? And that's where this topic kind of came from, with this spiritual versus Christian. But I think that it's important to before we really begin to dig into and delve into the deeper part of this conversation, that we really define the terms that we're going to be dealing with. Because let's be honest, words have meaning. And I'm a huge proponent of this, that before you can deal with what you're going to talk about, you have to be on the same page so that you at least have a good starting point. What's the point of me talking about eggs, for example? My favorite kind of egg versus your favorite kind of egg. If we're going to get into a debate on favorite types of eggs, if we haven't decided whether or not we're going to talk about the egg that the animal came from, we can't really talk about how we cook it until we've determined whether or not this is going to be a chicken egg or an ostrich egg or an emu egg or whatever. And I know that's an absurd example, but we need to at least understand that we're going to be talking about the same thing. You're comparing apples to apples, oranges to oranges. What's the point of having a debate or a conversation about a topic if we have not at least defined the very basics of the basics? In order to do that, I want to at the very least, come right out and define the terminology that I'm going to be talking about today. What's the point of us not doing that if we're going to have this conversation? First of all, when I say spiritual, or you'll hear me use the interchangeably, talking about being spiritual, or also spirituality, for the purpose of this podcast, what I'm talking about is going to involve the recognition of a feeling or a sense of belief that there is something greater than myself, something more to being human than the sensory experience, the things that I can see or hear or feel, and that the greater whole of which we are part of is cosmic or divine in nature. When I talk about spiritual or spirituality, it's this recognition of that this feeling that there's something greater out there. I don't know what it is, or the spiritual person, or this person that's seeking out this spirituality doesn't recognize what it is. They just realize there's something there. And it has to be greater than themselves, but they can't quite identify exactly what it is. Now, on the flip side, when we talk about Christian or Christianity, I want to make it very clear. I am not focusing on what we here in good old United States and possibly even Europe would recognize as evangelical Christianity. Okay? It's not what I'm talking about. I am also not pointing at any denomination, any particular denomination within the Christian faith, such as Methodist or Pentecostalism or Lutheranism. Not talking about that. I am also not talking about any of the cults that people associate with Christianity, like Mormonism or Jehovah's Witness or even the Baha'i faith. Okay? When I say Christianity during this podcast, what I am referring to is the historical biblical Christianity whose tenets and doctrines are found exclusively within the 66 books found between Genesis and Revelation. Okay? That's all I'm talking about. Just those 66 books. Just the tenets found within Genesis to Revelation. That's all I'm talking about. Those things that Christ taught, those things that his disciples turned apostles taught, that's what I'm talking. Historical, biblical Christianity. I'm not getting into the politics of Christianity. I'm not getting into the back and forth that seems to happen within, especially Western Christianity. I'm not getting into any of that. I'm talking about historical, biblical Christianity. Okay? So now, when you start to talk about which is the better path, when you're talking about spirituality, all right, being spiritual, and I want to preface this by saying that I am by no means an expert on the topic. I've done my research, went to school, learned some things, talked to some folks, and I have a general understanding of what this term means. So from my general understanding and from the communications that I've had with different ones and the research that I've done, being spiritual or the pursuit of spirituality, it seems to me to be the pursuit of not of a destination, but of a journey. Okay? Generally, a person that is spiritual or being or in the pursuit of spirituality, they refuse to acknowledge any true certainty of anything. And there have been some people who have attempted to include some of the major religions under the heading of spiritual, generally because of the belief that there's something greater than man. But those have never really passed muster, primarily because with spirituality, you don't really get to name that something. So once you cross that threshold of naming the something that you think is out there, of naming it God, then you lose access to being able to claim it as being spiritual or spirituality. Okay? It's that kind of includes atheists into that same umbrella of being unable to claim spirituality, because both the atheist and the theist, which covers your Christians, your Islamics, Muslims, all of that is covered under those who are not allowed or permitted under the umbrella of spiritual or in the pursuit of spirituality, because they have named what they believe or don't believe in. The atheist proudly proclaims, I don't believe in God. And the theist, i.e. the Christian, the Muslim, proclaims, I do believe in God. But the spiritual, or the one who's in pursuit of spirituality, is actually saying, I don't know. I don't know what's out there. It could be God. It could be an impersonal force. It could be a rainbow cloud floating out in the midst of the ether. I don't know. But the spiritual seeker claims no belief. Rather than reaching to either end of the spectrum, they just simply sit in the middle and say that they're seeking. But the question is, seeking what? Because whatever you're looking for, you do eventually want to find something, correct? Because according to the Christian faith, which is what I'm more familiar with, Christ said, if you seek me, you will find me. And so far as I know, just in the carnal sense, just in the general sense, when you look for something, you eventually want to find it. Am I right? If you misplace your keys, you don't just look for them just out of happenstance or just to be looking for them. You eventually want to find your keys. Am I right? If you misplace your wallet, you eventually do want to find your wallet. If a woman misplaces, God forbid, her purse, I don't know, she eventually does want to locate her purse or her wallet. If you're looking for something, you do eventually want to find what you're looking for. And when you really consider that idea of seeking, it does seem to be that this is incredibly subjective. And again, words have meaning, so let me clarify. The word subjective, according to the dictionary, is of, relating to, or emanating from a person's emotions, prejudices, etc. So in other words, it's heavily dependent on the individual. For instance, my wife loves chocolate. Me, I could take it or leave it. Now, I used to love it, but nowadays it's not a big priority for me. I'm not even that big on sweets like I used to be. So it's not that big of a priority for me. So in that regard, our preferences are incredibly subjective. So when it comes down to if we had to make a list of things that we were going to take on a trip, things that we definitely would not want to leave without, sweets would likely make her list, but I might not even consider them because our lists are going to be subjective. They're going to be personal. So what's important to her is going to make her list. What's important to me is going to make my list. And on the flip side, what's not important won't make either of our lists. So if she is relying on me to bring the things that are important to her, I may very well fail to bring the chocolate because it's not all that high on my priority list. So when we begin to look at the question, which is the better path, consider this question. And this is something I think that we can all see just by looking around at the world around us. Anybody can tell just by looking at the world around us that something is off. That the world around us is not as it should be. Okay? When you turn on the news, there's nothing but bad news all the time. It seems as if that's all that ever gets reported on. You rarely ever see good news being reported. As a matter of fact, in most cities across this country, they actually have to create segments within the news to report good news. It's become such almost a selling point with the news that this segment has become specialized, where they have sectioned that portion off just to tell you the good news. And it amazes me because it points out just how little good news there seems to be that they have to make a point of sharing it. But my point being that anybody with eyes and ears can tell that there's something off about the way the world is working around us. We ought to be able to tell that things are not the way that they should be. And the reality is that we have been relying on each other to police each other. So my question is, how's that working for you? We've been doing this for a long time. We've been policing each other for a long time. We've been trying to hold each other accountable for a long time. And it seems to be getting systematically worse, year after year, day after day, month after month. We fail to hold one another accountable. Our court systems, no matter where you are in the world, are getting progressively worse. Because it is far safer in the justice system for a person to be guilty and wealthy than it is for them to be innocent and poor. Because if you can afford to pay your way out, it doesn't matter how guilty you are, you can most likely get away with whatever you've done. But if you can't afford to pay for the retainer on a good lawyer, then you can most likely kiss your freedom goodbye. But it ought not to be that way. We have police forces that we ought to be able to count on to protect us when worse comes to worse. But instead, in many cases, those are the ones that we fear the most. And this is a universal problem. How did we get here? We got here because we relied on the wrong one. We relied on each other to police each other. We relied on each other to establish sets of rules to hold each other accountable. We relied on each other, who are always looking for something, always seeking after something, but never finding what we're looking for, and seem to be content with looking and never finding, to lead in a conversation on how to make a better world. How can you define for me what a better world looks like if you can't even tell me what you're looking for? But we deny the very one who has already defined for us what a better world looks like. When we begin to look at the historical Christian faith, Jesus Christ never denied any of the Old Testament law. He said he came to fulfill the law. And then he even took it a step further, that after he had fulfilled the law, he freed us from the law, so that we would no longer be bound by the penalty of the law. Because according to the law, everyone who broke it was doomed to die. That was the penalty for breaking the law. Everybody who broke the law was doomed to the same penalty, death, period. But Christ came and paid the consequence of death on our behalf so that we could be freed from that. That's how he purchased our salvation. And then after he had purchased our salvation, he freed us from that penalty of death so that we would then have the opportunity to freely choose whether we would accept the gift that he had given us or not. As we draw to a close, the trouble with being spiritual is that you spend all of your time looking but never finding. You'll spend your entire life looking for a solution and being convinced that there is benefit in the search and no benefit in the destination. When ultimately, sure, there's great benefit in the journey. You learn a lot during the journey. But if you don't utilize what you learn to ultimately help you to reach the destination, if all you ever do is travel, but you never reach the destination, what is the point of your journey? Which is a question that spiritualism or spirituality doesn't answer. It doesn't provide an answer for what is the point of the journey. We're just supposed to be satisfied with the journey itself. But the reality is, what point is there in the journey if there is no destination? So rather than being wrapped up in this mysticism of being satisfied with the journey, take a look again. Because every person who has ever taken a trip has only ever been satisfied when they reach their destination. And if you don't believe me, take some kids on a trip and see how often you get asked, are we there yet? Guys, I have enjoyed myself. It's been awesome. But I would ask that you take the time, go to the website, answer the poll. Which is the better path? What do you think? Spiritual or spirituality or Christian? Which is the better path? If you have any questions or even comments, leave your questions and comments on the website. Go to blueprintforlifepodcast.com. You can hit us up on our socials. Blueprint for Life Podcast on Facebook, on Instagram. You can hit us up on Twitter. If you have any comments, like, subscribe. We'd love to hear from you. I've enjoyed you. Come and see us again. Much love.
Hey there, fellow listeners. As we wind down another inspiring episode of Blueprint for Life, we want to thank you for tuning in. Remember, you can always find more uplifting content and past episodes on our website, blueprintforlifepodcast.com, or you can find us on Amazon Music, Audible, or Spotify. Join us next time for more faith-filled conversations and stories that fuel your spirit. Until then, stay blessed and keep shining your light.